My parents said, "You don't make financial contributions like your sister does. This is her home now." I replied, "Thanks for the clarity." Then I canceled the auto debit that had quietly covered their HOA dues since 2020. 2 days later, their lawyer emailed, "There's been a lien filed on the property. They're at risk of losing access." I never answered, because the lockout date was already scheduled. They gave the house to my sister over a promise. Not a down payment, not a signed agreement, just words. She told them she might be able to give more than what I offered, and that was enough. After years of helping them financially, cleaning up their messes, and basically keeping them afloat, they tossed me aside like I was never part of the plan. I found out through a photo on social media. Melissa standing on the porch with a bottle of champagne. Her husband holding up a set of keys like he just conquered something. That porch was mine. We were supposed to close that week. My kids had been staying there for the summer. We'd already told them we were moving in. My youngest had picked out his room. At first, I thought it was a joke. Some kind of dumb prank or a misunderstanding. I called my mom straight to voicemail. Called my dad. Nothing. I messaged them both. No reply. For 2 days, I heard nothing while they ignored me like cowards. On the 3rd day, my dad picked up. He sounded tired but not ashamed. Just said things had changed. Melissa offered them more. He said they didn't want to make things complicated. They'd made a quick decision. Quick. Like they hadn't been discussing the sale with me for months. Like I hadn't sent them documents and bank statements and a transfer schedule. Like I hadn't already paid the lawyer's retainer for the paperwork. I asked him how it made any sense. Melissa didn't even have a stable job. Her husband had just been laid off again. She's defaulted on every loan she's ever taken. My dad just brushed it off and said she'd figure it out. I reminded him of everything. The time I covered their mortgage during the thousands I gave them to fix the roof. The Christmases when I bought gifts for everyone because they couldn't afford it. The hospital bills, the groceries, the car repair. I brought it all up. He said it wasn't about money, that they had to do what felt right, that Melissa needed it more. Then he said the line that made something inside me go still. We're her parents, too. I just sat there for once. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't try to fix anything. I just listened while they tried to explain away a betrayal they hadn't even bothered to warn me about. And while they talked, I realized something. This wasn't new. This was who they were. This was what they always did. Melissa messes up. They cover for her. I show up. They expect it. She lies. They defend her. I sacrifice and it's forgotten. They didn't think I'd do anything. They thought I'd swallow it. Keep the peace. Move on. Because that's what I always did. But this time they took too much. This time they crossed the last line. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel sad. I just felt done. And they had no idea what that really meant. At first, I told myself to walk away. We'd find another house. It was just wood and drywall after all. My wife said it more than once, like she was trying to convince both of us. But it didn't sit right. It wasn't just about the house. It was the way they did it. Quietly without a word, like I was a stranger to them, and then they made it worse. My kids were still staying with them for the summer. That had been the plan before this all blew up. It was supposed to be a few weeks' time for them to swim, help with the garden, bond with their grandparents. I called my parents to say we'd be picking them up early. No answer. I called again. Nothing. Then my mom texted saying it would be too disruptive to cut the visit short, that the kids were settled in and didn't need the added confusion. She acted like they were doing us a favor by keeping them longer. I called again. This time my dad answered. He told me they didn't think it was a good idea to bring the kids back early. Said I was being emotional and that the kids needed a calm environment. I told him directly if they didn't let me come get my own children, I would show up with the police. He tried to play it down, told me not to overreact, but I was already done playing nice. The next day, my wife and I drove over. We didn't even get out of the car. I called the sheriff's office and explained the situation. Told them my parents were refusing to return our children. An officer showed up 20 minutes later. I watched him walk to the door, talk to my dad. There was some back and forth, but it didn't take long. A few minutes later, the kids came out with their things. No hug from Grandma, no goodbye. My dad stood at the screen door, arms crossed, saying nothing. That ride home was silent. My daughter clutched her backpack the whole way. My son asked if we were in trouble. I told them we weren't, that everything was fine now, but I knew this had left a mark. They turned something simple into a hostage situation. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought maybe that would shock them into realizing how far they'd gone. But then a week later, I got an envelope from a law firm with my dad's name on the return address. Inside was a letter threatening to sue me. Not a joke, a real legal notice. They were claiming I owed them money, that they had provided me with ongoing financial support and wanted reimbursement. It was pure nonsense. Every cent they had ever given me was returned or dwarfed by what I had done for them over the years. I didn't even respond. I handed it to my lawyer, who took one look and told me it was garbage. Said if they wanted to make fools of themselves in court, he'd be happy to take their money. I sent back a formal denial through him. We never heard another word from their attorney. But what hit me hardest wasn't the lawsuit. It was what they started saying to my kids. My daughter told me Grandma said we moved them out because I was being spiteful, that I didn't care about family. My son asked if I was mad at Grandpa forever. They were twisting everything, poisoning my kids just to keep control of the narrative. That was it. I went to the police and filed a report for custodial interference. I knew it wouldn't go far. The officer was polite but honest. They'd get a verbal warning, maybe a note in the system, but it was something, a line drawn. I didn't care about consequences for them anymore. I just wanted distance. My wife agreed. We started looking out of state, somewhere far enough that there'd be no more accidental run-ins at the grocery store. No more random drive-abys. 3 months later, we were gone. New house, new jobs, new schools, no contact, no Christmas calls, no awkward birthdays, just peace. And then, right when it felt like we'd finally left it all behind, karma came knocking on their door, and they came running right back to mine. It was a Sunday morning when I got the first call. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then another one came through a few minutes later. This time I answered. It was Melissa. Her voice was shaky, panicked. She said the house had caught fire. Electrical. Something about an overloaded socket in the laundry room. She and her husband had been out. When they came back, the entire back of the house was black. Firefighters managed to save the front, but it was basically unlivable. Insurance wouldn't cover most of it because, of course, they never updated the policy after the ownership change. She was crying and rambling about needing a place to stay. I didn't say much, just asked if everyone was okay. She said yes. Then she paused, said our parents told her to call me, that they didn't have the space and couldn't take on that kind of responsibility. Right? The same parents who gave her the house behind my back. The same parents who nearly kept my kids from me. The same ones who sent a lawyer after me like I was some stranger trying to scam them. Now, suddenly, they couldn't help their daughter and her husband, even though they had just spent their entire world for her. Melissa asked if she and Greg could stay with us for a while, just until they figured things out. Said it wouldn't be long, that she'd pay rent if needed. I told her we weren't in a position to help. She started crying again. Said I was being cruel. A few hours later, my mom called. No hello, no small talk. Just straight into it. How disappointed she was, how I was turning my back on family. She said things like, "We're all we have," and that Melissa needed her brother. I asked her why they didn't take her in themselves. She said they weren't equipped for it. That Melissa and Greg had too many things, that it would be too disruptive. I asked her if giving someone a house just because they promised more money counted as disruptive. She hung up. Over the next few days, the calls didn't stop. Melissa, my dad, even Greg, they all started pushing this idea that I was the one being selfish, that I was letting family sleep in the motel like some monster. They acted like none of the past ever happened, like they hadn't tossed me aside, like they hadn't dragged me into legal threats and tried to twist my own kids against me. I didn't respond anymore. I let them sit in their mess. But I did hear through a mutual friend what happened next. Since the insurance payout was almost nothing and they couldn't afford to repair the house, the bank started getting involved. Turns out Melissa had missed payments. They'd be seizing the property. Foreclosure was on the table. That's when things got pathetic. My parents started telling people I had refused to help, that I abandoned Melissa, that I let the house go. They left out the part where they gave it away over a lie. They left out the lawyer, the threats, the manipulation. They were scrambling now, trying to find someone to blame, someone to point at. And since I wasn't there to defend myself in person, they painted me as the villain. But I didn't care. Let them burn through their own web. I was done cleaning up their disasters. They kept calling, not constantly, but just enough to remind me they weren't going to let it go. My dad left a voicemail one night around 11 p.m. sounding like he'd been drinking. Said he couldn't believe how far I'd fallen. That family meant stepping up when it's hard and that I'd become heartless. I didn't call back. A week later, I got a group email. My parents, Melissa, Greg, and a few extended relatives they thought might help pressure me. It was some long-winded guilt trip about how families weather storms together. How Melissa and Greg had. No one else. And how disappointed everyone was that I couldn't find it in my heart to open my doors. One cousin I barely spoke to replied with some nonsense about forgiveness. Another one said nothing, but I saw they'd forwarded it to their spouse. I replied to the whole chain with one sentence. I wasn't family when you gave her the house, so don't call me that now. That shut it down. Meanwhile, the foreclosure process moved fast. The house was in Melissa's name now, and she'd ignored enough letters from the bank that they'd already scheduled the sale. I heard from a friend back in town that they were packing up what they could, storing it at our parents' house temporarily, but our parents weren't letting them stay there. That part really blew my mind. They gave her the house, and now they were acting like she was some temporary house guest with a time limit. Apparently, Greg had tried crashing with a friend from work, but that didn't last more than a weekend. Melissa ended up staying at a cheap motel on the edge of town. One of those places where you pay weekly and hope the locks hold up. That's when they started calling my wife. They couldn't get to me, so they tried a softer target. My mom called her at work, pretending to be just checking in, then casually dropped in that Melissa was sick and scared and alone. Tried to appeal to her empathy, which honestly I knew she'd fall for if I didn't intervene. My wife has a soft heart, too soft sometimes. But this time, even she saw through it. She blocked the number the same day. And then came the rumors. Our old neighborhood had a Facebook group. And apparently my mom had started hinting to anyone who'd listened that I had taken the house away from Melissa and forced her out. I saw the post because a former neighbor messaged me directly with a screenshot. She said she didn't believe it, but thought I should know. I didn't even feel angry. I just laughed after everything they'd done. This was their strategy. Lie to the town, paint me as some villain while they watched the fire they started burn the last thing they had. They wanted pity. They wanted someone to come in and save them. I was done playing that role. They gave it away the day they decided a promise was worth more than a lifetime. Let them see what promises are really worth when the bank owns your front lawn. I thought they'd finally run out of moves. The house was nearly gone. They burned every bridge and no one in town was buying there. Jacob is heartless routine anymore. Then something arrived in the mail that made my stomach flip. A letter from Child Protective Services. At first I thought it was a mistake. Wrong address. Maybe a clerical error. Then I opened it. An anonymous report had been filed against me and my wife. It claimed we were emotionally neglecting our children, that we were isolating them from their extended family, depriving them of social and emotional stability, and creating a hostile environment at home. The words on the page made my head spin. It read like someone had studied us, warped the facts, and written it with just enough truth to sound plausible. CPS had to investigate. A caseworker was scheduled to visit within the week. My wife was devastated. I was livid. This wasn't just petty anymore. This was war. I knew exactly who was behind it. No one else had the motive or the nerve. My parents and Melissa couldn't take being cut off. So now they were trying to destroy us from the inside. I spent the next 3 days digging. I printed out every message, every email, every legal letter, even screenshots from that Facebook group where my mom had been spinning her story. When the caseworker showed up, I was ready. She was polite, professional, and to her credit, seemed to know immediately that something didn't add up. She spoke with the kids alone for a few minutes, asked about school, their friends, how they felt at home. Then she sat with me and my wife and said she didn't see anything concerning, but still it had to go in the file. She left, promising to close the case, but the damage was done. My daughter was confused and scared. My son started asking if he was going to be taken away. Try explaining to your kid that their own grandparents tried to weaponize the state against their family. A few days later, word spread around town that Melissa and Greg had moved back in with my parents after getting kicked out of the motel. Not surprising. What did catch me off guard was what came next. Melissa was pregnant. That one hit like a punch. Not because I cared about her having a kid. I didn't. But because I could see the game. My parents had changed their tune overnight. The same people who made her sign a written agreement to leave within 30 days were suddenly celebrating this as a miracle. Facebook posts, group texts all about how God gives new beginnings and family always wins. I got a screenshot from an old high school friend who still lived in the area. My mom had commented under the ultrasound photo tagging me. Even though some people have turned their backs on us, this baby reminds us what love really looks like. I didn't reply. I didn't react. But inside, something clicked. They weren't just trying to guilt me anymore. They were rewriting the story, turning themselves into the victims, the martyrs, the misunderstood parents who gave everything and were betrayed. And now there was a baby involved. A clean slate, a new pawn. I knew exactly what would happen next. They parade that child around town like a bandage, expecting everyone to forget the mess underneath. And then came the twist I really didn't expect. My father called me again. First time in months, left a voicemail. He said they wanted to make things right. That maybe we'd all said things we didn't mean. That maybe this baby was assigned to start fresh. He even offered to pay for us to come visit. Said he'd like us to see the nursery. The nursery. They wanted us to walk back into that house, what was left of it, and pretend none of it happened. I didn't delete the voicemail. I saved it because part of me wondered how far they'd go if I said no again. And I had a feeling I was about to find out. I didn't respond to the voicemail. Didn't call back. Didn't text. Just left it sitting there saved on my phone like a warning. My wife asked if I was going to block them for good this time. I said, no, not yet. I wanted to see what they try next. I knew this wasn't over. 2 weeks later, they made their move. My mom sent an envelope. No return address, just our names scrolled in that familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter handwritten on floral stationery, pages long. It started with fake warmth. Talked about the baby, about hope and forgiveness. Then it shifted. Said she and my dad had spoken to a lawyer again and that they were considering revisiting past grievances. Claimed they might still have a legal case regarding the money they'd supposedly invested in me. Called it a path to reconciliation. It was nonsense, obviously, but the intent was clear. They were using the baby as bait. And when that didn't work, they moved to threats again, just like before. That same week, I found out through someone back in town that the house was officially foreclosed. The bank took it. Melissa and Greg were forced out again. Only this time, there was no motel, no backup plan. They were couch surfing between old friends and people too polite to say no. My parents still claiming they weren't in a position to take them in long term, even with a baby on the way. And then, in one last act of desperation, they started telling people I had offered to take them in and backed out. The story twisted fast. Suddenly, I wasn't just the son who left. I was the reason Melissa was homeless. I was the selfish one who turned away his own blood. I got messages from 2 old family friends asking why I couldn't just be the bigger person. They didn't know the history. They didn't know about the manipulation, the CPS report, the lawsuit, the emotional damage. They just heard what my parents fed them. That I had a house, a job, a family, and I wouldn't help. It made me sick at first that they could ruin everything and still get people to pity them. But then something changed. I stopped caring. My wife and I talked one night after the kids were asleep. She asked if I ever thought about moving again. I said, yeah, maybe, but not to run, just to make a statement. A fresh start, far away from all of it. She smiled and said, let's do it. And we did. We moved across the country. A small town, slower pace, fewer ghosts. The kids adjusted fast. New friends, new school, a backyard with real grass. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't post about it. I just disappeared. Months passed. Occasionally, I'd get a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I never answered. I'd hear my mom's voice, sometimes rambling about the baby. Once Melissa left a message asking if we could put the past behind us for the sake of her daughter. I deleted it before she finished the sentence. I don't know where they are now. Maybe still couch hopping. Maybe trying to guilt the next relative. Maybe they finally turned on each other. All I know is I don't think about them anymore. They built that house on promises. They burned it down with lies. And when the smoke cleared, they thought I'd be standing there waiting to help. I wasn't. I never will be again. The update. I didn't think they had it in them to surprise me anymore. After the manipulation, the lies, the CPS stunt, what else was left? We were states away, living in a new town where no one knew their names. I thought the story was over. Then, in the middle of a quiet Tuesday, a certified envelope showed up at our door. It was an invitation, a baby shower for Melissa. At my parents' house, not some rented hall, not a friend's backyard. Their house, the same house they swore, was too small, too broken, too chaotic to take Melissa in long term. Now they were hosting parties like nothing happened. They printed the invitation on glossy cardstock. They even had a gift registry. I read it twice in silence. My wife saw it and just laughed. Not a joyful laugh, a short, tired one. Then she tore it in half and threw it in the trash. I said nothing. There wasn't anything left to say. A few days passed. Then came the phone call. Unknown number, no voicemail this time. It rang again a few hours later. I didn't answer, but they kept trying over the next 2 days. Finally, I let one call go to voicemail. It was my dad. His voice sounded thinner, older somehow. He said something had happened. There had been an accident at the baby's shower. A candle, maybe a spark from the oven. They weren't sure. What they did know was the house had caught fire again. This time it was worse. The flames started in the dining room during the party. A bunch of decorations caught, and with everyone distracted, it spread fast. The fire department managed to put it out, but half the house was gone. The kitchen and 2 bedrooms were destroyed. Smoke damage took care of the rest. He said no one was hurt, that Melissa and the baby were fine, but now they had nowhere to go. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said they needed a place to stay just for a little while. He said it softly, like he thought the way he asked might change the answer. I asked him why they didn't just stay with Melissa and Greg. He sighed. Said Melissa had moved in with one of Greg's cousins and they didn't want the drama, that the baby needed calm. He said he and my mom were in a motel again, but they couldn't afford it much longer. He actually said, "You've got the space." I reminded him they had a house twice and they'd burned both of them down. Not just physically, but emotionally, relationally. Every bridge they ever had with me, they set fire to. He started to say something else, but I hung up. The next morning, I got a text from Melissa, a picture of her holding the baby. No message, just a photo. I didn't reply, but the most surreal part came 2 weeks later. I got a call from an old neighbor back in town. She said the bank had taken what was left of the property. Not only was it condemned, but it was scheduled for demolition. The land would be cleared and sold. Melissa's name had been officially removed from the title after a court settlement. She and Greg declared bankruptcy. But then she said something else, something that stuck with me. Apparently, my parents had told everyone that I was the one who promised to buy the house back, that I had offered to make things right after the fire, that they were just waiting for the paperwork to go through. They hadn't stopped lying. Not even now. They'd rather invent an imaginary version of me than face what they actually did. That's who they are. That's who they'll always be. But that imaginary son, the one who comes back, forgives, saves the day, he doesn't exist. And neither do they. Not in our lives anymore.